you very much, Mr. President. We have a saying in the U.S. Congress: when somebody speaks before you and you think they said exactly the right thing, you say, "I adopt the remarks of the gentleman who preceded me." Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. President Tsereteli, Secretary General Montella, my delegation from the United States, headed by Senator Wicker and Senator Senator Wicker and Congressman Ben Cardin, my dear friend, which you would be surprised if I said that, and the Maryland delegation. Gwen Moore is representing Alcee Hastings. Many of you know Alcee Hastings. I would call your attention, as I did yesterday, to the fact that Alcee Hastings, who is the former president of the Parliamentary Assembly, is not with us. He has a severe health problem that he is challenged with, and I would ask you to say a prayer for his health and his good being. We are pleased to be here on this day on which we celebrate Independence Day. But as I said last night, what we celebrate as well is the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, one of the most compelling documents about freedom and individual liberty that has ever been written. I thank the people of Luxembourg for welcoming us here to celebrate with them our Day of Independence and this Parliamentary Assembly. Prime Minister Bettel, thank you very much for your leadership, your passion, and your insights. President Etienne, thank you for hosting this assembly. When I joined the parliamentarians from across North America to launch the assembly in April 1991, peaceful revolutions had just removed dictatorships from the Baltic to the Adriatic. The power of the people had proven itself far greater than the powerful few who ruled through division and fear. From the halls of Versailles in 1919 to the beaches of Normandy in 1944 to the streets of Berlin in 1989. Throughout the 20th century, democracy prevailed in the face of authoritarianism. It did so because of the people, because of those who debated, who fought, who marched, and who never wavered in their faith that government by, of, and for the people would secure a brighter future for themselves and their descendants. In 1991, democracy was ascendant. Its eventual triumph throughout the world seemed then inevitable. In 2019, today, however, democracies are back on the defensive, challenged from within as well as from without. I just came from Budapest, where the Orbán government, frankly, has curtailed freedom of the press and the independence of Hungary's judiciary. Judicial independence has been under assault in neighboring Poland as well. In Turkey, a mayoral election was initially overturned when the governing parties lost. A journalist was murdered last year in Slovakia for exposing corruption. And too many journalists languish in jail as we speak and meet here today. In Russia, where democracy arrived with such promise in 1991, autocracy and oligarchy have returned in full force. In my own country, partisanship and polarization have opened chasms where there ought to be cooperation. Too many of my fellow Americans are losing faith in democratic institutions because those institutions failed to deliver justice and a better life for the many as they saw the few enriched. President Ronald Reagan, visiting the British Parliament in 1982, warned, and I quote, "Democracy is no fragile flower. Still," he said, "it needs cultivating." That is true today, as we witness democracy dimming in places where it once seemed so welcomed and so inevitable. Autocrats have grown bolder in their assault against global democracy. They have honed their tools of division, distraction, and dehumanization. They unleash their hackers, bots, and fake news to nurture doubt and fear among our citizens. I remain optimistic, however, because I have seen democracy's vigor, strength, and resilience. Throughout my life, I've witnessed the power of people in action. I saw it 30 years ago when I visited a crumbling wall and heard the singing of liberated people in the streets of Berlin. And I saw it on Tuesday in Budapest when I met with Hungarian democracy activists and those from growing oppositions. In their energy and their faith in democracy, I was reminded of the great freedom fighter Lajos Kossuth, who was commemorated with a bust in the United States Capitol just outside my office. That, I suggest to you, was the founding ethos of this assembly, that elected representatives can learn from one another and hold each other accountable to our common principles. We were building then on the foundation set down in the Helsinki Final Act, signed in August '75, which recognized, and I quote, "the close link between peace and security in Europe and the world as a whole." In it, he spoke of the torch being passed to a new generation, unwilling to witness, and I'm speaking of John Kennedy, unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which we are committed today at home and around the world. In 1991, we established this assembly so that we, too, could pursue that defense of human rights here and around the world. The success of this assembly, and indeed the success of democracy, will depend not on what we did in 1991, but what you and I and our delegations and we parliamentarians will do in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. It will depend on whether elected representatives deliver for the people and prove that representative institutions work, or whether government by, of, and for the people will transform into government by one, or and, for the powerful and the few. As the President Emmanuel Macron of France reminded our Congress last year as he spoke to a joint session, he said this: "We, elected officials, all share the responsibility to demonstrate that democracy remains the best answer to the questions and doubts that arise today. The antidote to the forces arrayed against democracy from within and from without is to show that democracy works for our constituents, restoring and preserving their faith in electoral government, create jobs and opportunity, safeguard our environment, build roads and schools, and make health care affordable and accessible to all. And as our declaration said, holding the truth that all of us are created equal is central to our policies. But we cannot do it alone, any of us. The end of the Cold War saw a commitment to strengthen and expand the multilateral institutions that preserve, protect, and defend democracy. America has been proud to stand with our democratic partners in these efforts, and we stand with you today, and we will stand with you tomorrow. In our Congress last April, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg declared, and I quote, "The strength of a nation is not only measured by the size of its economy or the numbers of its soldiers, but also by the number of its friends." Today, on America's Independence Day, I will visit, as was referenced by the Prime Minister, the hallowed ground where more than 5,000 of my fallen countrymen rest in eternity, less than 2 miles from this hall. They died liberating Europe and Luxembourg from fascism during the Second World War. In the cemetery's chapel, I will stand before an altar inscribed with a passage from the Gospel of John. "I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish." It is up to us, fellow colleagues, to ensure that their sacrifice and the sacrifices of so many other citizens from so many countries was not made in vain. That government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. As President Kennedy said, the torch passes. Our time to defend and extend democracy and freedom and justice and human rights is now. This assembly must not fail. The generation to which it will pass the torch of freedom, justice, and democracy depends on us. God bless you, and God bless America, on whose birthday we celebrate. Thank you very much.